All right, next up, we have Mike Gray from Second Watch. Going to talk about GCP platform support for c7n-mailer. So feel free to go ahead and share your slides and take it away.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. Oops, doing the tunnel vision there. Hopefully that's gone away. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening for folks all around. I actually don't know where everybody is, but it's great to be here today. I'm going to chat with you a little bit today about some of the new functionality that's been included in the c7n-mailer in the last couple of months. Those of you who are frequent GCP users probably are already aware of this and hopefully are taking advantage of this. But if you're not a frequent GCP user, or maybe you don't use the c7n-mailer too often, I'm here to let you know that we do have support for GCP now. If you're used to the way that it functions in AWS and even a little bit the way that it functions in Azure, you're probably wondering, how do I actually use this? This is something that I typically will deploy with a Lambda or with a function or a container in Azure. But in GCP, it's a little bit different. This is more of a, not quite MVP, but still early stages of functionality for the c7n-mailer in GCP. So first thing you do is get it set up as you would for any c7n-mailer implementation. Let me just make sure that we can see this. You all can see my GCP Cloud Shell now, correct? Hopefully so. I can't hear anybody, but I suppose that's expected since most of us don't have audio connected. So let me get the editor up
You're
here.
good.
Okay, awesome, thank you. All right, so your mailer setup is going to look pretty similar to what you have done in AWS or in Azure in the past, with a couple of notable differences. So first of all, the role that you present, which would normally be your AWS IAM role, this field has to be present due to restrictions within the mailer itself that would be a little bit tricky to extricate, but you can leave it as a blank string as you see here on my screen. Hopefully it's big enough. I'm not quite sure if we can get a little bit bigger. Yep, there we go. It should be a little bit better. And then you're going to want to set a QURL that is the subscription, a PubSub subscription that you've set up in your project for Cloud Custodian purposes specifically. You can also set up a dead letter queue or any of the usual normal setups that you would have for GCP PubSub. And then you'll go ahead and set your from address, which would look fairly familiar here as well. Sounds like there may be a comment. Okay. And then the way that we have it currently is that you can use an SMTP server, you can use Datadog, or you can use Slack. And the Datadog and Slack integrations are exactly as you would see in Amazon or in Microsoft Azure. So no changes there. You just set your API key and your application key for Datadog. For Slack, the usual setup. SMTP, if this isn't something that you've set up in the past for AWS, might look a little bit different than you've expected. And there's a new feature that's available to you within GCP that not quite the same as you'd see in the other two clouds. So you'll go ahead and set your SMTP server. Here I've set it for mailtrap.io, which is a great site for testing out different SMTP examples without using your own SMTP server. We'll set the port to the default. Go ahead and say, yes, we will use SSL. And then integrate your username here. And here is the newer feature. You can actually pull in the password from a GCP secret manager secret. So you'll go ahead and put the path to that secret here. Make sure that you include the number of your project as opposed to the ID of your project. That does make a difference. And then you'll include the secrets and the name of the secret here. Now, by default, this will append a version / latest to this. If you want to pull in a specific version in here, which depending on your use case, that may make the most sense, you can go ahead and specify that and it will not append that. It does a quick check to make sure that the path is what it's expecting. And if it's not, it will append the latest version onto there. And then from here, you'd set up the policy pretty much the same way you'd set up any other policy. The information is available here. An example is available here in the documentation, but I can show you what we have set up here. So we set the notification block here as a variable using a YAML anchor. That makes it a little bit simpler if you have Cloud Custodian YAML policies where you've got many, many policies inside of a single file. You can use this as a link, as a variable, as opposed to having to type that every single time. So we don't usually go for maybe a dry approach in YAML per se, but this does help keep some of those file sizes down if that's the way you've structured some of your policies. So I found that useful in the past. I'm showing an example of what that is here. So the transport would be a type of pub/sub. You'll go ahead and put the pub/sub topic here, not the subscription. So want to be clear on the distinction that for the mailer, you'll want to include the subscription, the mailer YAML configuration. But then for the policy itself, you'll want to actually point that to the topic. And here I've just got a very simple policy. We're going to pull in all of our GCP buckets that we have, and then we'll send that list of buckets over to our email address. I did want to mention for those of you who might be wondering, well, wait, that doesn't look like Second Watch. I've recently switched jobs. I'm actually at Defiance Digital now, which is that an email address that you see there. I also have an example of what the Datadog integration might look like here. For those of you who don't use c7n-mailer too often, this is an example of how you might do this. So basically, we just align this with a metric in Datadog, and we've got it namespaced out. So you've got a custodian.yourcloud.yourresource. The name of the policy. I found in the past that makes it much easier to search for these metrics later on, and also easy to set up dashboards, reporting, any sort of information you'd like to do within Datadog in that fashion. We'll comment it out for now because I don't have Datadog set up here appropriately. The format is just straightforward text, but of course you can do this with your HTML templates. Anything that you're used to with your standard c7n-mailer will work here in GCP c7n-mailer. And then the reference back here to the transport block. So once we've got that set up, we would go ahead, let me see if I can fix the zoom here a little bit. We will go ahead and do a custodian run our example.yaml file with an output right here in the local directory. Pause a moment awkwardly, give a quick authorization. And we can see that I have two buckets in this particular project. So we've got two notification actions that have dropped that information into pub/sub. So let's go ahead and do the c7n-mailer run. So for those of you who've worked in AWS or Azure and you don't typically run the mailer manually, this may look a little bit different as opposed to Lambda or, like I mentioned, a Azure function that'll go through and run this periodically, or a container that'll run this periodically. You can actually just run a c7n-mailer --run --config and then pass it the configuration, and it will work manually. As I mentioned before, this is the way that we have to do it in GCP today. PRs are welcome, as I understand it, to add the Cloud Function functionality so that you don't have to do this manually in either a container or on instance or some other compute of your choice. So we'll go ahead and run that. And it's pretty descriptive. Typically, I will see that I had something in there, and this is always how demos go, right? You don't get exactly what you're looking for. Downloading from the pub/sub subscription, here we go. So it did identify that we had some items in the queue there. It looks like there was a bit of a delay, so it's going to run and pull those in, and then we can check in Mailtrap and we can see that those emails did go out. So be patient, as I was not there just a moment ago, because it will sometimes take a little bit of time for that pub/sub queue to populate. But then in here you can see all the raw data with the very default out-of-the-box installation. I wanted to show you just sort of the bare minimum that you need. But of course, set this up as you would any normal c7n-mailer implementation that you already have for your organization. Use most of your templates. They require very little alteration to work within GCP. I've done that for a client in the past. Obviously, I can't share that with everybody here, but if there are questions, I'm usually fairly active on Slack. There's the Cloud Custodian Slack that's available. And then every once in a while, I'll poke my head into Gitter as well. And then, of course, everybody in those communication streams can also be helpful here to make these look a little bit nicer. You generally don't want to just send all of this raw JSON out to users. So that is basically what we have here for the GCP c7n-mailer. I believe we can open it up to questions at this time, correct?
Yep.
All right.
All right. Let's see what we have here. Any questions so far for Mike?